All right, well, welcome to the All Reality Study Group. This is the meeting arm of allreality.com. That's our website where we discuss all these issues. And we try to have more fun presentations for the meetings than sort of the serious debate that we have on the website. Today's presentation, I think, will be a little of both, because we have a physicist from the University of Washington. And are you a quantum physicist? What is your specialty? Say that again.
I started out with neutrino physics, which is sort of an intersection between astrophysics, particle physics, and nuclear physics. And then after about 4 years of that, I switched over and then ended up doing my dissertation research in crystal chemistry and looking at defect structures as crystals grow and the patterns of information that they transfer through their crystal growth, and then doing fractal analysis on those patterns to see if there's information stored in them.
All right, well, you heard it right from Theresa Bullard's mouth. So let's hear more and give a nice welcome to Theresa Bullard.
So I'd like to thank David and the All Reality group for inviting me to speak. So part of when David first approached me, his interest was in my physics background. But also in my background in consciousness studies and more metaphysical things in nature. So part of my path has been to weave the two together. I did finish my Ph.D. in physics at the University of Washington. I finished that in 2008. And through my time in graduate school and doing research and so forth, I personally just felt a little like there was too much of its own dogma. There was no room for asking the questions around meaning and so forth in physics. Can everybody else hear me? It's going to be a little hard to do that. Okay, let me step up here too. So in my process through physics, I just found that it had become rather rigid in a certain mindset. And there wasn't a whole lot of room for asking questions that were on the edge, or what they would call on the fringe. Because there's a lot of emphasis on credibility and staying within a certain framework of credibility and traditional science. And that traditional science was based on a Newtonian mindset. Even though they were very quantum in their newer studies and in the research and so forth, the mindset itself was still based on old principles of science. And so my heart just was calling me in other directions, and I left graduate school after finishing my PhD, and then went off to kind of forge my own path ahead of how can we bring a reunion between consciousness and science and bring it into helping us shift our paradigm of how we're viewing the world. So some of the work I'm going to be presenting on today is a little bit of that. It's like, how can we use these principles of quantum physics and also some of the old principles of where science originally came from before it divorced itself from the idea of consciousness or our essence of what makes us human. And how can we use these principles to harness our ability to be more creative? In particular, this one's about creativity. And much of what I do through Quantum Leap Alchemy is this blending of ancient wisdom principles with modern and ancient techniques for harnessing consciousness with then the principles of new science. New science, not just quantum physics, but also with epigenetics and many of the biofield sciences that are coming forward, neuroscience and so forth. There's a lot of new things that are very exciting that are being discovered, complexity theory and so forth, and they're all starting to point to the same direction, that our mindset does make a difference in our experience of the world. So we're going to talk first just about creativity today. And creativity is that part of us that really envisions beyond what we have an experience of in our immediate physical environment. So, you know, what we see and experience with our five senses is immediate, right? That is information coming in from our immediate environment, usually based on physical. But what we're perceiving with our five senses, does anyone know how much of our physical reality that actually represents? 1%. So what we perceive with our five physical senses represents 1% of the actual physical reality around us. And that's not to even mention if there is a consciousness reality or spiritual reality, those don't even fall in that percentage, that 1% or that 99% that we're talking about. We're talking just physical. And that is based on, now science is starting to get more and more sensitive detectors. They're able to start measuring energies that are in, for example, the ultraviolet spectrum, the gamma ray spectrum, the infrared spectrum, right? So there's a much broader spectrum just within the electromagnetic energy frequencies that we can detect that we are not able to see with our eyes. Same thing with what we can hear. You know, there's a small band of sounds that we can hear, but there's ranges of sounds much beyond that. Same thing with what we can touch, what we can smell, what we can taste. So our five senses are based on a narrow range of sensitivity, and our detectors can go beyond that and say, no, there is more to the physical reality than what meets the eye, right? And it is our imagination, though. When it comes to creativity, it's our imagination that allows us to start perceiving possibilities that are beyond what our five physical senses are immediately perceiving, right? So imagination is what gives us an experience of the world around us, but in a way of what can you envision it becoming, what can you imagine that might also be there that you're not directly perceiving through your five senses, and it guides us in our creations. It guides us in our dreams. It guides us in what we want to experience as well as what we fear, right? How much of our imagination is engaged in what we're fearing or what we're avoiding? Often we're playing out scenarios in our mind that, you know, are negative scenarios. How many of you have ever experienced that? Okay. So we're using our imagination for either good or for ill. Right? And what I want to help people do is to realize that our imagination is not just false thoughts, right? It's not just, you know, this dream world that we're in. Our imagination can become something that we can harness to use to make an impact in the world and hopefully make a positive impact in the world. And the imagination has inspired innovators, right, throughout time, throughout history. And you have the results, you know, so for example, Einstein, you have results of these innovations that can be amazing, right? Like the whole introduction of the quantum revolution was revolutionizing for our world, and we enjoy many of those technologies today as a result. But they can also be terrifying. For example, the innovation, the creativity that was required to create the atomic bomb, and, you know, various other weapons that we use in a very destructive way. And so, but innovation itself is hopefully going to be used in a good way. And my goal is to help raise the consciousness so that we will start using those possibilities and those potentialities in a good way. Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Right? He said that knowledge is limited, whereas imagination encircles the world. So Einstein has a lot of quotes about right brain and left brain and our creativity versus our logic, and he always leaned towards the imagination, towards the creativity as being a key to his innovation. And then he said also that we cannot solve the problems that we face in our world today with the same level of thinking that we created them with. Right, so if we want to address the problems that we have in our world today, we have to shift into a totally new way of thinking about things. And so this is really at the heart of what I want to talk about, because what is influencing the way that we are thinking about things right now? What is the type of thinking that we're dealing with? So first of all, I'm going to define two things. This is called breakthrough creativity. All right, so the first definition is creativity. And creativity would be defined as your ability to use your imagination to develop new and original ideas. Right? To use your imagination to develop new and original ideas. And breakthrough, right? The breakthrough piece here is that a breakthrough is an event that causes or marks a breaking down and therefore a passing of a barrier of progress. Right, so we're breaking through a barrier of progress and leading towards something that is a new discovery. And so what we need to do to break through is we need to look at what is that barrier right now. Right? What is the barrier that we want to break through? Because that barrier is what's kind of keeping our thinking in a box. And we want to break out of that box. And the type of thinking that we have been so influenced by in our society still today is very old paradigm. It's hundreds of years old, right? And it's based on what we would call, what we perceive as our reality of how things are, right? How we reason, how we access new ideas, how we allow for possibilities, and what do we blind ourselves from in terms of the possibilities that are available to us? And so our thinking is still stuck in Newtonian mindset. So like I was saying as we opened up, even though we have the quantum physics mindset, even though we have this whole new theory of physics at the fundamental levels of reality, we are still thinking according to a Newtonian mindset. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Newton's theory, about 300 or 400 years ago, Newton's theory was revolutionary at the time. It took us out of a realm of superstition and medieval magic and into an era of reason, into an era of we can make sense out of the world and we can come to understand it. So it was really revolutionary. But the ironic thing about Newton's theories is that it became used as a way to separate science from spirituality, to take God out of the picture. But Newton himself never intended that. Newton was an alchemist, and 10 years ago we would not have been told that, but now that information is starting to come out more and more, and people are starting to retell history based on more of the truth of what was going on. So Newton was an alchemist, and Newton's whole purpose was to try and understand the mind of God, or to understand the mind of Creator, and also to recognize how can we work with that, how can we harness that to make an impact in the world and to learn how to direct these forces. But then around the same time, there was more of a political agenda that was starting to happen to separate the science from the religion, right? To separate the church and their control over the scientists' ability to pursue the truth in experimental ways. Because sometimes those scientific discoveries were challenging church doctrine. And so there was a need for the scientists to break free. And the way that they did that was to say, you know what, let's just leave the spiritual matters in the hands of the church and let us try to understand the material world, and let us then create this separation between these two realms so that we can have our freedom and our autonomy to pursue the science. And so the problem was, though, that over time that became the new dogma. That became the new reality. And it became more and more and more materialistic, because they also started to find that when I harness these physical laws, then I can also make money off of it. And so there became a financial drive behind it as well. And a technological drive, right? The whole Industrial Revolution kicked off as a result of Newton's laws, which was great, which brought us, out of this kind of medieval Dark Age type time and into an era of great progression and an ability to start linking, and you had the railroads come in, you had factories come in, you had a lot more high-level production that started to happen as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Now, it came with its downsides as well. But ultimately, Newton's theories were so successful and so common sense in terms of people's experience of the world that these ideas, these basic ideas from Newton's theories, got extrapolated into business. They got extrapolated into finance. They got extrapolated into economics, into relationship dynamics, into pretty much every area of life, into education, right? Newton's theories, Newton's principles got extrapolated into all areas of life. And because of that, it created an entire paradigm shift for our society, in the West especially, right? Not so much in the Eastern mindset, but in the Western mindsets. So let's take a look at it first so that we can understand what is this box, because even though science has started to change, the mindset of our paradigm, of our principles that we view reality through, the glasses that we wear to view reality through, are still influenced by this old Newtonian mindset. It still drives the bureaucratic system that we see in business and government and education and so forth. So we need to really reassess, is this true, right? So the first principle of Newton was reductionism. Reductionism means that if I can take a whole down to its various constituent parts and understand the parts, then therefore I understand the whole. Right? So it's saying that the whole is simply the sum of its parts. The problem with this is that it leads to, it completely ignores interaction between the parts, and therefore it also ignores the synergy, the something new that comes as a result of these little parts interacting, right? Usually that's what we call synergy, right? That the whole now becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And so this reductionism mindset has led to a mindset of limitation. It's led to a mindset of dividing things, creating rigid rules. It led to a lack mentality, okay? So everything reduces rather than everything becoming greater than the sum of its parts. It's very linear, right? The next principle was determinism. Determinism says that there are a set of rules that govern everything in the universe, and that if we knew, it says that if we knew the starting position of every particle in the universe, like if there was some all-seeing eye that knew the starting position and starting conditions of every particle in the universe, it would be able to then determine the rest of the timeline of how those particles would play out. It would determine all future times instantly. So everything is predetermined at that point, right? It's deterministic, cause and effect, and every cause is a physical cause, right? And it only follows the 4 physical laws that they know of in the classical science. And so this determinism, then, the problem with this is that it leads to it takes away free will, basically. It leads to this idea of you have no choice in the matter, and then that is disempowering. Right? So it's a mindset of disempowerment. And we have how much disempowerment do we see in our world today? A lot. So much victimhood, right? So much victimhood. So this mindset, we really need to shift. And the next one then is separation, which kind of goes hand in hand with the reductionism. But separation then says that everything is separate. You have these individual bodies, these individual particles, these individual atoms and so forth, and the only way that they interact is if they have a direct exchange by some physical force, right? So there is no connection. And everything is basically isolated, and again, no connection between us, right? And what this then leads to, when science continued to progress according to the Newtonian mindset, the next piece that came and added on top of this was Darwinian evolution, right? Darwinian evolution then said, well, if we're all separate, then there's something outside of you to fear, right? There's something outside of you that could cause a threat. And if there's a threat that is separate from you, you don't have any control over it, you don't know, and therefore you must fear the unknown. And so the survival of the fittest then led to a mindset of competition and power struggles, and only the strongest will survive, right? Rather than actually what the reality is that we're starting to find now is more of the newer science is that no, evolution is based far more upon cooperation and connection rather than on isolation and competition. So this idea of separatism leads to competition, right? That's another thing that drives our world, right? We still see that, especially in the West. Not so much in the East. In the East, they have a different mindset, but in the West, we very much have this competition mindset still driving us. Starting to change, though, fortunately. And then the fourth principle, and this is the final principle of Newtonian mechanics, is realism. It says that there is a very real, objective world out there. It's tangible. It's something that we can experience with our five senses or with our detectors. And what this ends up doing, this idea of realism, is that it says that the only thing that is real is what is physical, what is material. And therefore, the only thing that has value is what is material and what is physical, right? So it leads to this greed mentality, this materialism mentality. Come on. So this final piece of Newtonian science leads to a mindset of greed and materialism. So look at that now. We have a mindset of lack and limitation, disempowerment, competition, greed, and materialism, and power struggles. These are the things driving our society. Can we see this? Can we recognize this? Yeah, do we like this? No, we don't like this. So the question is, can we shift this? And in shifting it to a new mindset that is still based on principles of science, can we make a difference, right? Can we find a mindset that will solve the problems that we face in our world today? Created by this old mindset that was good at the time, it served at the time, but we have outpaced that usability of that mindset, right? We're evolved beyond it. We're running really fast right now in our society and our progression. Everything is becoming far more interconnected, far more complex, nonlinear. This mindset and this view does not work anymore for us, right? So it's time to shift. And there's great studies done by Thomas Kuhn in the study of scientific revolutions. And it's the whole idea of what does it take for a paradigm shift? What does it take for a paradigm shift in science, and what does it take for a paradigm shift really in our society in general? And a part of it is that science, what he says is that science, traditional science, clings to, even though we think science is innovative and pushing the edge and so forth, the traditional science mindset clings to the old model. They cling to the old ideas. And there's a reason for that. You know, you don't want to just throw everything out just because somebody comes up with an idea that sounds nice. They base it on proof, right? You have to have, a theory is no good unless you have evidence. But if you have evidence, then we got to throw the old stuff out. Now, quantum physics doesn't necessarily throw Newtonian science out. What it says is that Newtonian science is still valid, but it's only an approximation when you start statistically averaging things over a lot of particles, right? Over a lot of units being added into the mix. But it's not the fundamental truth. It is not the basis of reality. Right? And so now we're going to look at this. So creativity, we're going to go back to creativity here for a moment. Creativity is the opposite of routine. It's the opposite of habit. Right? So we got to get out of our habits of mental thinking and shift in order to start creating or accessing that creativity. So I believe that the new approach to accessing creativity in terms of getting out of routine and getting out of habit is to start accessing a higher state of consciousness, which, our consciousness is the source of where that creativity comes from anyways. But most people are approaching creativity from the world, right? From reaction to the world, from personality ways of thinking about things, from indoctrinated habitual mindsets and ways of thinking of things. They're not accessing creativity. They're accessing learned things, right? So if we want to access true creativity, we need to first activate our imagination, access kind of these higher realms of the mind and consciousness, and then bring those ideas through. Then learn how to use the mind to bring them through into a more practical, tangible form. So this is really what this whole breakthrough creativity model is about. And that when we start to shift to that higher state of consciousness, that's when we can start accessing a quantum view of reality. Whereas when you're coming from worldly view, from personality view, you're going to experience things in a Newtonian mindset. So if we want to start accessing a quantum mindset, we need to shift into an altered state, into some higher state of consciousness where some of those rigid boundaries that we experience in the old approach to things they're going to disappear. Now, the magic happens outside your comfort zone, right? So in order to make a shift in your mindset, you're going to be uncomfortable because it challenges your worldview. It challenges your way of doing things. It takes energy to shift into a new way, right? If the comfort zone is the habit zone, right? We're just doing things in autopilot, we're in habit, and so forth. And in order to shift out of our habits, we have to have some kind of energy that's going to come in and give us the impetus and the desire and the will to overcome the habits, right? And often that's going to come from getting really passionate about what you want to create, what you want to shift. So again, that energy is going to come from something internal. But in order for us to really operate at the edge, to really be innovative and push the boundaries, we got to be outside of our comfort zone. And in a way, some people really fear that. They would rather just live an easy life, which it may not be an optimal life, but it's an easy life when you're in the comfort zone. But then there's those who really will harness, they'll feed on the adrenaline, they'll learn how to harness it, and they'll direct it towards operating at the edge, which is a very creative place to be. And it's not necessarily a stable, comfortable place to be, but it's creative. There's a lot of possibility there. So it's time to break free. So my question is, are you ready? Yes? Okay. So then the next question is, how do we get there? How do we break free? What do you think? How do we break out of our old mindsets? Meditate, okay? Okay, get comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable. Don't think that anything is wrong with the state of discomfort. Yeah? What else? Okay, nonlinear activities, get into your right brain, get into movement and other creative things, definitely. That's good. Yeah? Why? Yeah. Yeah, you're right, yeah. So the why behind things is the purpose, the vision, that's where that energy is going to come from. And in the West, we especially want to know why. Right? We ask that question actually a lot. I always ask that question. Why? Why do you want me to do that? Why is that the best way to go? And it's okay, but sometimes there's a matter of trust, right? But don't necessarily stop asking the why. You might meditate on the why. But ultimately, the why needs to come from within. So really, we need to leap, right? In order to break out of the old pattern, we need to leap. And to leap, you may not have a full, clear understanding of why yet. You just need to trust, and you just need to know and have that faith that I'm going to leap, I'm going to break out, and we're going to start making a difference. And there's no easy way to do that. Remember, you can't be in the comfort zone. You just go for it, right? Now, I have found, though, that when we leap, we can have a hang glider. right? Something we can kind of strap onto our backs that will help us navigate those times of change, to navigate the creative energies and get ourselves over to the other side of where our vision is taking us, and kind of glide in rather than leaving it all up to chance. And what I personally have found as being that piece for the hang glider is what we call the ancient tradition of alchemy. Now, when I say alchemy, I do not mean this old medieval science of trying to turn lead into gold, unless we're going to try and take the idea of lead into gold as a metaphor, right? Turning the lead being the impurities, the limitations, the things that no longer serve us, and turn those into gold being, the prize that can come out of the transformational process or into a higher state. Now, alchemy, when I do say alchemy, what I mean is the art and science of how things transform, right? How do we harness creative potential and direct it according to certain universal principles, and yet engaging our will and our consciousness and our abilities directly with that process, because we can. And so the how to transformation and to breakthrough is what alchemy is all about. And what I've done is I've taken these ancient principles of alchemy, as a basic formula, and then combine that with the quantum science. And when you hold the two paradigms up together, this ancient paradigm that is the predecessor, is the precursor to modern science, because modern science, modern medicine, modern pharmacology, chemistry, all these things came out of the tradition of alchemy. But when they were in the alchemical tradition, consciousness was a piece of it, right? The subtle essence of life was a piece of it. And then science divorced itself from that and became very materialistic. So if I want to re-bridge these two areas, let's go back to when they originally were one thing. And yet now let's compare that with the modern quantum physics paradigm and see, okay, what is the mindset? And what are the principles that govern this? And how then can we become empowered to engage with that? And what I found is that they're very, very similar mindset for how to harness these potentials. So we're going to now consciously create, just briefly, a lot of people use this word transformation and the word breakthrough a lot, but they don't really have an understanding. They make transformation be synonymous with change, or breakthrough just overcoming a barrier. What alchemy would say is that when something really truly comes through a transformation and a breakthrough process, what results in the end is totally different from what we started with. Same basic constituents in essence, but a totally new arrangement and organization of those ingredients. So when you look at, for example, the caterpillar and the butterfly, they're completely different looking, right? And yet it's the same cells, the same DNA, the same essence and materia that the butterfly emerged from. But that caterpillar had to go through. First there was the growth phase, and then there was I'm going to go into the chrysalis and the incubation stage, and then there was a breakdown of the old form and an emergence of a new form that started to come through. But there's this whole struggle internally that's going on in that chrysalis. If you were to open up the chrysalis in the middle of its stage, you would not find a caterpillar in there. And you wouldn't find a butterfly in there either. What would you find? A mess, a gooey, icky mess, right? The whole caterpillar completely breaks down and it becomes this chaotic soup. And then ultimately, though, the cells reemerge and a new form starts to be built off of the old material. And there's actually 7 stages. Okay, this process of metamorphosis is the same as the alchemical process. And there's 7 stages to it. And that is what alchemy really is. It's to take something, to completely transform it into something beautiful that can take flight and bring greater beauty to the world. And is no longer earthbound, is no longer so limited as it was before when it was in that caterpillar type state. And I don't have a whole lot of time to go into exactly what those 7 stages are. I do have a book, a small book that I wrote. I don't have the book with me because I ran out of copies, but you can order it online on my website, or you can get it through ebook on Amazon. It's called, I'll show you it in a little bit. But I want to at least give you some of the basic principles of how how alchemy works. And the main thing is that it's about harnessing differences. Right? Harnessing differences, things that are totally different from each other. And when those two things that are totally different from each other interact, what do you think comes from that? Synthesis? Not right away. Maybe. Yes. Okay, like a lot of energy, and that energy creates a tension. There's a struggle. There's like, okay, which one's gonna, is it going to dominate? Are they going to be in balance? Or how are they going to mix? How are they going to blend? And a lot of times they're not in balance, and so there's this tension, and it's a struggle. So alchemy learns to harness that energy of that tension that comes up when you combine things that are different. We harness that energy, and then we take it through the alchemical process, and then we learn to bring those two things that are different into harmony, into synthesis, into a synergy that comes to a whole new level of wholeness and balance. So it is that a lot of times people, when they hit a time of stress in their life, right? Often we're thinking stress is bad. Don't get stressed, right? And yet we operate under stress a lot. So stress is not bad, according to alchemy. It's just how you let it affect you, right? Are you going to learn to take that energy of that stress and harness it and direct it? Or are you going to let the stress break you down and not actually use it to break you through? Right? So we want to break through rather than break down when it comes to the tension. So we're working with these differences. And we can, these differences have been depicted through the yin-yang symbol. We have left and right. We have masculine and feminine. We have yin and yang. We have active, passive. You have the sun and moon are often juxtaposed. Subconscious and conscious is another difference that we have. Like sometimes our conscious mind wants to accomplish something, but our subconscious mind sabotages it, right? So, and then you also have differences like introversion and extroversion, or outwardly expressing and inwardly expressing, right? So these are the differences that we want to learn how to harness. And the way that we harness them is through a process that we call mediation. Right? So we're going to break the two down into 4. And in alchemy, we work with what are called the 4 elements. I'm going to describe metaphorically what those mean. And the reason that I'm taking you through this is because at the end, I want to actually take you through a formula, a 7-step formula for breakthrough creativity. And if we have time, we'll even do the meditation. So the balancing differences through mediation. Right, so if I have fire and water, which are total opposites basically, what would be an intermediate step that contains a little bit of the two that could be used to mediate? Steam, okay, yeah. So, and steam is a vapor, right? So it's more the air element. So air mediates between fire and water. And so we have these 4 elements. So fire is what we would call a volatile essence. It's active, it's dynamic. If you have a fire, it's constantly rising up and ascending, and it breaks things down. And your fire in you is your creative spark. That's where your ideas come from, right? That's where your passion is. That's where your visions are. So that's your fire. Your air can also ascend. Air is also expanding, it's active. Molecules of air are never still, right? They're constantly bouncing and moving around. Air is, in us, air is our thoughts. Air is our mind. And consciousness and mind are a little bit different, right? Consciousness is the essence of that intelligence, and the mind is the framework within which it works. And then your water is going to be something we call more of a fixed element. If I have a glass of water, it's going to kind of just stay there. It's not too active, right? If I pour that glass out, it's going to descend. It's going to flow down, and it'll take on any shape I give it. So it's a little more fixed. It can be captured, right? In you, your water is your emotions and your intuition. right? And that creativity, but from a more of a place of artistic creativity. How can we capture that into a form? Right? How can we bring this essence into something unique, right, and make it more tangible? And then your earth is going to be most fixed, right? The earth is the final tangible product, the body itself, the ability to ground something, the ability to make something happen and take action, and bring that tangible form. Now, what alchemy says is we want to take the volatile, like the air and the fire, and we want to make them fixed. We want to bring it into a more grounded state. And likewise, we want to take what is fixed, what is rigid, and we want to kind of free it up, right? Volatilize it. We want to free it up. So we're going to switch these two things. So when you're stuck in an old form or pattern, really a fixed pattern, you want to go through a breakthrough. You want to break it down. You want to catalyze the breakthrough and allow that energy to what we call sublimate, to kind of ascend or to go to a higher state. And when you have something that is volatile, when you have like these ideas and they're erratic and they're kind of chaotic and so forth, and it's not very formed or linear, we want to then try and contain it. We want to bring it into a level where we can settle it down and actually wrap our mind around it. So these are the actions that we're going to take in this formula for breakthrough creativity. Now, just before I move on from some of the alchemy principles, here's the cover of my book, if you guys are interested. I do, in this book, I explain what alchemy is, just a little bit of the history, the formula itself, and then I show how it applies to our social transformation. So the transformations that we've been going through, especially since the turn of the millennium and the changes and where they fall in that alchemical process, where we're getting stuck, where we need to go from here, and what we need to do to break through our social changes that are happening right now, and really harness and direct this process forward rather than what keeps happening, where we keep sliding back. We hit a point where we're not making the breakthrough, and then we slide back into old patterns. But it also very much applies to our own personal transformation. But for the rest of this talk, we're gonna talk about the formula, the 7-step formula for breakthrough creativity. So the very first step, if you want to create something new, or if you want to work on a project, what do you think is the first thing you need to do? Intent, okay, yeah. And that's kind of the why question, right? Why am I doing this? Have a vision, yes, exactly. I called it vision as well. So this is about getting clear about what your vision is. What do you want to do? Why are you doing it? What's the purpose behind it? And what is that big vision, right? And you really want to spend time on this. What is the big vision? And it could be, maybe you don't want to create something new. Maybe you just have a problem that you're trying to solve. Maybe you're getting confronted by some issue in life, and ordinarily in an issue that confronts us, we want to go into reaction mode, right? We're going to react to it, which is going to be driven by subconscious patterns, old ways of being, which are not necessarily going to give us anything new. They're going to keep creating the same results we had before. So instead of reacting to an issue or challenge, we're going to try and use this formula to solve that problem from a new state of consciousness, right? So then in that kind of a case, the vision is, some new solution to the problem that I'm facing right now. Right? And then ultimately the vision would be, how do you want to look? How do you want to feel? How do you want to see, on the other side of this issue, what would you like the resolution to look like? And so you're going to identify some problem, or you're going to identify some project or something that you want to create that's new. Right? Everyone kind of clear about that first step? It's pretty simple. Okay. But it's really important. So even though it's simple, it's important to get as clear as you can about your vision, okay? And then the other important clue, the key to the vision, is you have one thing and one thing only that you're going to take through this process. And this relates back to both the alchemy as well as the quantum physics, that there was a teaching by Hermes that said the work of wonders, the miracles, will happen through one thing, right? When you focus on one thing only, and it is from that one thing that a projection will come out. But if you take multiple things, let's say just 2 things, you're going to, into the creative potential of the quantum field that we're going to access, you're going to introduce a duality. You're going to introduce a multiplicity. So if you want to have harnessing that creative potential from the quantum field into, a powerful way to create in this world, you got to just focus on one thing at a time so that you're not mixing your messages of what you're wanting, to bring through. So one thing at a time. And you just get really clear about that one thing. And then when you want to create another thing, you go through the process again, and then you just focus on that new thing, right? But just one thing at a time is what we're focusing on. So then step 2, so here's vision, and then step 2 I'm going to call illumination, okay? So once we have the vision, rather than just, okay, let's just attack this, how can we do this? Rather than going straight to brainstorming mode, we're going to now shift. Again, this has to do with Einstein's quote, if you can't solve a problem from the same level of thinking that you were at when you created it, we need to shift to a new state of thinking, right? So we're going to shift our consciousness to a higher state. We're going to go to a more illuminated state. And from here, from this illuminated higher state, we expand the boundaries of the mind. We kind of let go of some of the left brain, rigid, rational thinking, and we start expanding into more of a whole brain state, or even a no mind state. You might even go to a place where your mind is just out of it, and you're just planting a seed, and that energy is just going to work for you. And that ultimately is the ideal. So already here at this step 2, most people in the world are not doing this, right? They are not trying to solve problems from a meditative state or a higher state of consciousness. They're just solving problems from current learned thinking, from worldly thinking. And they're not going to come up with anything truly new or innovative when doing that. They're just going to keep repeating the problem. Even one of the greatest innovators of modern day, Steve Jobs, regardless of what you think about his personality, he was one of the most prolific innovators of our time, and single-handedly, or maybe not single, he had help from a few key people, but he really helped revolutionize our society with some of his innovations. And Steve Jobs was an avid meditator, right? He's pretty well known for having gone, removing himself when he was working on the next new innovation or some problem that he wanted to solve. He'd kind of remove himself and he'd go off on some kind of a fasting binge or a really intense kind of retreat. He'd isolate himself, he'd meditate, he'd contemplate, he'd really go intense with this. And what he told his biographer was that, I'm going to give you the whole quote. He said, if you just sit and observe, you will see how restless your mind is. And if you try to calm it, you're only going to make it worse. But over time, it does calm. And when it does, there's room to hear more subtle things. He said, that's when your intuition starts to blossom and you start to see things more clearly and be in the present more. He said, your mind just slows down and you see a tremendous expanse in the moment, right? You see so much more than you could before. And he said it's a discipline. You have to practice it. Right? This is not something that we get just once. Yeah. Yes. Well, some of them I know. He was a child of the 60s, right? So he experimented. He experimented with LSD. He did a lot of these things in the 60s, but he also, studied TM, and he, went and sang Hare Krishna with the Krishna, he did a lot of things. He didn't just do one thing. He might have attributed it to that because that was about expanding your limitations, right? He took a shortcut to expanding limitations. It's not the approach that I recommend, okay? I've seen a lot of creative people come out of that, but it's not the approach that I recommend. Why not? It kills brain cells. There's no doubt about that. Yes, in a chaotic way, right? So what happens is that you actually lose potential when you do that, and it's not sustainable. Right? You might have that blasting open, but then you can't sustain it, right? You have no control over it. You're then dependent on something outside of you to create that state. That's not what we want. I want you to be able to access it from within yourself, to sustain it, to have control over it, and to be able to use it at any time, right? And yes, it takes practice. Yes, it takes discipline. No, it's not the shortcut, but it's very powerful. And in the long run, it's going to get you far more when you go that route with accessing higher consciousness states. So shifting consciousness is something that we have learned how to harness more in today's world. We know a lot more about it through various studies that have happened with meditation and yoga and Qi and so forth, and also through brainwave. Because of neuroscience today, we understand more of how the brain is operating and what's happening when we shift our states of consciousness. And a lot of this shifting consciousness has to do with brainwave technology or brainwave entrainment and what oscillatory patterns are dominant within the brain, and how harmonized are those patterns within the brain versus how chaotic are they within the brain. So when it comes to accessing what I would call an illuminated or a higher consciousness state, you're going to have a much more coherent and harmonious brainwave state. Maybe we can close that door, because I don't think that's going to go off anytime soon. Good, okay. Okay. If it goes off again, we're going to close it. So when it comes to the brainwave frequencies, there's a range of frequencies that our brain will oscillate at, that our neural connections will oscillate at, anywhere from 0 up to, they've measured up to about 100 hertz, 100 beats per second. And then there's, is it right brain, left brain? Is it whole brain? Is it cortex? Is it deeper parts of the brain? So these are all things that are important when it comes to our shifting of consciousness. Now, in the last 30, 40 years, there have been more technologies that have been developed to stimulate the brain in a way that entrains it, what we call entraining, meaning shifts, and elicits a particular frequency pattern within the brain. And one of the best techniques that I personally have been exposed to is through audio technology, through what is called, there's binaural beat, right? Where binaural beat is where you have a set of headphones on and you send one frequency in one ear and another frequency in another ear, and the two signals combine over the corpus callosum, and they create an interference pattern which then forms a third signal. But that's created inside your brain rather than what you're actually hearing. And so it's forcing, or I should say eliciting, let's use a nicer word, the synchronization of the right and left hemispheres of the brain. And then, based on the interference signal, you can tune that in to particular ranges of frequencies, and anywhere from the 0 to 100 hertz. And then the deeper you go, the more expansive your consciousness becomes, right? So the higher frequencies they call beta and gamma frequencies, those are more like outwardly focused. And then the more you kind of close your eyes and start going into slower frequencies in the brain, the more you're basically quieting your mind down and allowing for the expansiveness of subtle energies to be felt and experienced and tapped into. And I used this quite a bit from like 17, 18 years old, all the way through to today. I learned how to quiet my mind down and be able to go to sleep more easily and without having to use any kind of other aid other than the music, to relax and release stress and tension, I've used it to heal my body from injuries and other things, and I used it to study, right? So you can also use the gamma or the beta gamma ones for focus and study and attention, but a more harmonized focused attention. And I found that when I was working with it in that capacity, I could read longer, retain more, and stay focused without getting so tired during the studies. And then if you do this with music, because music without lyrics has a natural ability to entrain the right and left hemispheres of the brain. So just on the background with music, no lyrics, right? Because lyrics are going to trigger more the left hemisphere of the brain, which is the language center. Music in the background, nice, harmonious, classical music or guitar music or even electronic music, but just no lyrics, that in the background automatically is going to harmonize left and right hemispheres of the brain. And then when you start embedding these brainwave frequencies beneath it and doing other entrainment, audio entrainment type stuff, you can literally shift the brainwave, the dominant brainwave frequencies to elicit or support you in accessing altered states. So I use this a lot because you can do 22 years worth of meditation every day, 2 hours a day, and then learn, how to rewire your neural networks over those 22 years so that you can do this at will. Or you can use some of the modern technologies of stimulating the brain in a particular intentional way, and that'll speed up the process of rewiring the brain so that you can then elicit these states. But then when you have done that, what I found is that once I had learned to do that, once I had trained my brain to be able to do it, I knew how it felt. Now, without even using those tools, I can do it myself. Right? So it's a faster way of being able to harness the brain and quiet it down and so forth. Now, in addition to the newer technologies of how to do this, of course, there are ancient technologies of how to do this, ancient techniques that come from various wisdom traditions from around the world. A lot of people are familiar with the Eastern traditions, but there's also a lot of Western traditions that are very familiar with doing this. And ultimately, it's about the art and science of how to shift consciousness is about two things. Number one is relaxing the body and mind, which is the brainwave shifting thing. And then number two is learning to raise our level of consciousness to higher states of intelligence where we can come to a state of oneness or boundlessness or beingness, right? So we kind of start to shift away from that identity of the self and into this much more expanded state. And there are ways to do that as well. So through my training, I really worked with various alchemical principles, Kabbalistic principles, various ancient mystery school teachings, and further enhanced my abilities to shift consciousness. And I use things, or in these traditions, some of the common things that are used are meditation, of course, learning to clear out the subconscious mind, right? So there's some psychology of clearing out the old belief systems that don't serve, because those become a filter in our conscious mind, so we want to clear those out. Using breathing techniques, right? You see that a lot in yoga and Qi exercises, Tai Chi. Using vibrational techniques through sound, through music, through chanting and words, specific words, which would be formulas, words of power. And then also learning to focus and harness the mind, right? So you really learn to focus your attention. And then there's also, you can use specific geometries, sacred geometries, mandalas, certain patterns that become an object, like a gateway for you to kind of shift into tapping into a new type of energy. So those are some of the common things. No matter what tradition you're looking at, you see the same common pattern in all of them. So that is the state of illumination. We're going to work with some of those techniques through this formula or this meditation that I'm going to guide you through. And then third step is stillness. So once you access that higher state of consciousness, once you kind of move beyond the normal worldly limitations and access a higher state of consciousness, the next step is to move into stillness and silence. And through the stillness, through the silence, you can access what is called the void. And the void, in order for us what we need to do to tap into that infinite creative potential, first, we need to go through a state of nothingness, of emptiness. Right? So we come to the state of emptiness, of focusing on no thing in particular, and just beingness, right? Just pure beingness. And then once you access that state, then you can tap into infinite potential. Then you can tap in from nothingness to allness, right? And that is where we start getting also into the quantum domain, is at this step of stillness. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I want to just give you a little quote. This is from Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote the Book of Five Rings, where he was a martial artist and from Japan. And he said he really studied the void a lot. He studied this idea of stillness and silence. And he said something along the lines of, from the stillness comes all movement, And the silence ushers forth all sound. Okay? So that is the source, that void is the source. And the void is not something that's out there or up there, it's here now. Right? The void can be accessed anytime, anywhere, any place, just by coming into the here and now. Right in front of you, it's right in front of you. And it's just a matter of shifting, right? Learning to shift. And when you do, then you can start to access that infinite field of potential that we are told about from the quantum physics. Right, so now we're going to enter a little bit into some quantum principles. You guys with me here still? Okay. So the success of quantum physics has become the most successful physics theory that we've ever had. It has been tested and re-verified and confirmed. It's never been disproven. It's not necessarily the ultimate because there's still some big unknown questions, right? There's still some smoking guns that scientists are still trying to find the answers for. And that's what has led to certain theories of everything, string theory, quantum field theory, and so forth. So there's more theories that are out there, but quantum physics right now is the most successful theory we've had. And what I have, as I've studied quantum physics, I would say that there's about 9 principles that are pretty interesting. You know, instead of the 4 of Newtonian mechanics, there's about 9 principles of quantum physics. Several of them are interrelated, right? So we could identify them as just 4 principles, but within 1 or 2 of those principles, there's a whole bunch of stuff buried in there. So I like to kind of explore some of those principles. Today we're going to go through 4 of the 9 principles. And the first principle is this idea of the gap. This is about what is quantum. What does quantum even mean? Anyone here know what quantum means? Energy? Energy? No. The word itself, what does quantum mean? Tiny? Yeah? No. More than one? Okay. Okay, so sort of. Really, quantum means to quantize, meaning to make into discrete things, right? So instead of a line is actually a bunch of discrete points, right? They're little points, and those points are individuated, they're discrete. But even though you might have a ton of points, there's still a gap in between them, right? So the gap is really fundamental to quantum physics. And it is in the gap where you start to access empty space, and in that empty space is where you start to access the quantum potential. So rather than focusing on the thing, rather than focusing on the point, you focus on the gap. And the gap is the stillness. The gap is the space between, the silence, right? So the best, easiest way to think of this is in computer binary language. You have ones and zeros. And the ones are the bright spots, or the points, and the zeros are the emptiness, the black space, right? Or the zero space. And so it's that ones and zeros thing here that we see. You can kind of see the ones and zeros in the background, and then coming out of that is this vast energy that's starting to emerge out of that 0-point field, right? So the 0-point field is the idea that the quantum vacuum is not empty. Right? It is not empty. It is not a zero energy. Right? It is actually a non-zero energy. There's a constant energy to the background field, and what it says, though, is that it's all potential energy rather than actual energy. Different from dark energy. Different from dark energy. This is called the 0-point field. So basically what it says, in the space of just the tip of my pinky finger, so 1 cubic centimeter of space, you have enough energy in that 0-point field within that, if you could tap it, to create an entire new universe. Right? And that's how much energy is there. We could fuel the world's energy needs forever, just from being into a little bit of space and the 0-point field. So there's a lot of people really interested in this for obvious reasons. Have any of them actually been able to tap it? I don't know. No one's proven it, right? but they're still working on it. And but the whole concept behind the Matrix, all right, was The Matrix is a great movie, metaphorically speaking, for so many reasons. But here, the idea, Matrix, the whole mindset of Neo coming out of the Matrix and becoming this avatar-like being, that is like shifting out of the Newtonian paradigm into the quantum paradigm. And the Matrix itself is these ones and zeros, right? As you have the green spots are the ones and the black spots are the zeros. And Neo in the Matrix, he basically, when he finally shifts and becomes awakened, he learns how to not focus so much on the physicality of things and the reality of things. He learns to, move the Matrix by manipulating the empty space. And from that, he's able to dodge bullets and jump off buildings and, go flying. Yeah. So we're gonna go through it, but basically it's a process of going into what we call passive meditation. You focus on your breathing. Your thoughts are your thoughts. You just kind of let them go. You relax. You bring your attention instead to relaxing the body, focusing on breathing, bringing in some light, and then we're going to go through a visualization process that will get us shifted into a higher state of consciousness. Once we're in that higher state of consciousness, your thoughts are kind of out of the way usually. You just keep focusing on breathing. You just enjoy that energy, and you go into this boundlessness. You go into this empty space, and at some point, your brain waves started going deep into theta, maybe even hitting into the delta range. And when they hit that delta range and that theta range, you start kind of like nodding off a little bit, right? Zoning out, or they call it clicking out. And in delta, there's no thought going on at all, right? So it's when you start hitting into the deep brainwave states that the silence comes in. The thing is that, so some meditation techniques are going to say you want to get there and you want to stay there. I would say you want to get there, you want to stay there for 5 to 10 minutes. But then we want to do something with it. We want to access it. We want to harness it. We want to direct it, right? So we're going to access it, we're going to get into it, and then we're going to bring ourselves out of that and then direct those energies towards what it is we want to create, or whatever problem we want to solve. So then we're going to go shifting from passive to active meditation. So yeah, we'll lead you through it, and then you'll kind of get a feel for it. The next thing, when it comes to accessing this infinite field of potential, is that you have to accept uncertainty. Okay, so the quantum principle of uncertainty is really important when it comes to tapping into the infinite possibilities that it presents us with. A lot of times people unconsciously fear the void because they fear the unknown. They don't want to face the unknown because they're going to lose control, right? They're not in control anymore. And so we have this attachment to control in our lives. So this is about facing uncertainty, surrendering and trusting and moving into the unknown. And instead of fearing the unknown, is to recognize that from the unknown, boundless possibilities open up to me, rather than it being something that I'm not going to be able to have any conscious choice in the matter of. Actually, that's when choice becomes the most powerful, right? Is when we can go into that uncertainty. So uncertainty says that rather than clockwork determinism of Newtonian mindset, we are going to go into this sea of possibilities where it's all happening at once. It's the principle of what we call complementarity, that the more precisely I know one, or the more precisely I select out one possibility, the other ones disappear, and then the less precisely I can know a complementary variable. So in quantum physics, the way this looks is that the more precisely I know the position of a particle, the less precise I know its speed and momentum. The more precise I know the exact time that something happened, the less precise I can be about its energy, and vice versa. right? So there's the more I know if it's a particle, the less I will be able to access the wave possibility. The more I know the wave possibility, the less I can access the particle possibility. So there's these complementary values. And there is no certainty in the quantum realm. None. This uncertainty is what rules here. So rather than fearing uncertainty, we need to learn to enjoy and embrace uncertainty. So here you go, iPod Shuffle advertisement. Enjoy uncertainty, right? Just allow for things to unfold. Allow for, possibilities to open up and to surprise you rather than having to always control. And yet, when we can tap into those uncertainties, that is, instead of the deterministic approach of Newtonian mechanics, we have this uncertainty. That's what allows for choice. That's what allows for our conscious exercising of free will, our participation with the process. And it also allows us to kind of surrender and deepen our faith in the journey rather than having to control and think that we can make everything go according to a limited mindset. The third possibility or principle here of quantum physics is the now, principle of the now. And this is, basically saying that when it comes to being in the gap, being in the void, you can't be projecting into the future or into the past. It's only accessed in the here and now. This starts to sound a little mystical, right? But it is a quantum principle. The quantum principle says that the past does not determine what you're going to measure right now. Right? If something goes into a quantum state, all possibilities are present, and just because it was in a certain state in the past does not mean it's going to be in that state now. Right? And then also the future does not exist. The future is undetermined. Or if a future exists, all possible futures exist. Right? So it's really about what matters is observations and choices in the now. Right? And that's it. So we're going to, here's a nice quote that really captures this from William Blake: "To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." That is a very quantum mindset, very much so. And the void grants us the access to that. We're going to move through the next several stages a little bit faster, okay? So here, once we have we've tapped into that stillness, we've tapped into that void, the next thing is we plant the seed of what we wanted to work on. What was the idea that we wanted help with? What was the problem that we were trying to solve? That kind of thing. And as you do, you just now introduced a thing into the nothingness. And then that becomes a reference point. That becomes a center point around which all this energy from the creative field starts to accumulate around and starts to kind of explode out from. So this I call the ignition. This is the spark, and the spark then ignites an expansion, an explosion. And in alchemy, this is going to be working with the most creative element, which is the element of fire. This is the breakthrough point. This is where something really, truly new starts to come in, but it's coming in from this infinite source. And you start to break down old barriers, old limited forms, and you start opening up to a whole new flood of energy rushing in to support you. You're not going to harness it yet at this stage, other than maybe bringing it into a container, because it's going to be sort of tip of the consciousness at this stage. We're not quite fully able to grasp what that idea is that's coming in. It's still the tip of the consciousness, but we're going to be able to start at least feeling the energy shifting in. So this is kind of like what happens with the Big Bang point. Right, out of that quantum sea, out of that vacuum of possibility, something emerges out, and then you have, as soon as that something comes out of nothing, you have this explosion. As soon as there's just virtual particles coming out into actuality, all of a sudden all this energy starts exploding out, and that's this point here. And then from there, you have the sea of possibilities now becoming probabilities, right? You have all that, you start to kind of see this swirl of options, and it's a superposition of all states at once, right? So in quantum physics is when you're in that quantum sea, all possibilities exist at once in what we call superposition states. So now is where choice comes in to the picture. So we have a sea of choices, and this is where we have the quantum observer effect come into play, where we can actually now engage our choice of now what do I want to do? How am I going to select out of the possibilities? And this is basically the observer effect, and the role of consciousness in physics is very controversial still, but the founders of quantum physics debated it very deeply. And several of them concluded, that quantum physics basically says that consciousness is a part of our experience of reality. And it is about the choices we make, ultimately. And it says that this is a participatory universe. It's not deterministic. We participate in the outcome somehow, whether it's by the way that we choose to set up our experiment, or the way we choose to view it based on our assumptions. That's going to help determine what we actually get, what we experience, whether we see a particle, whether we see a wave, whether it's force, or whether it's a form, whether it's a position, or whether it's a momentum. What are we choosing to see is going to help determine what we actually get. And one way, just from our perspective point, I want to just give you a little experiment here. So we have these perception images, right? So do you see the vase, right? And then do you see the faces looking at each other? Which one's a wave, which one's a particle? Which view is the wave, which view is the particle? What do you think? Right, okay. So if you're looking at the vase, is that a particle view or a wave view? How many of you vote particle view? How many of you vote wave view? How many of you have no idea? Okay, so the vase is a form, right? So the vase form is going to be, it's a discrete, it's a particle, right? It's a solid thing that we can perceive, right? So that's a particle view. Now, what about the faces? When you're looking at the faces, is that a particle view or a wave view? The faces, is it a particle view or a wave view? Wave? How many of you think wave? How many of you think particle? But you're choosing to shift your perspective from one another, right? Okay, the faces are also a particle view. Why do I say that? Because they're a form. The faces are particles because they're a form. They're a solid, recognizable thing. Okay? Now, what I want you to do is just don't focus on either the vase or the faces. Just take in the whole thing all at once. Both possibilities are there without recognizing either possibility or the other. You see that? Can you do that? Shift your focus so that you're just looking at the whole thing all at once. You're not focusing on the vases. You're not focusing on the face. Can you see both possibilities there at once without focusing on either one? That's the wave view. Because you have both possibilities there at once. Now from that simultaneous possibilities, you're going to select, do I want to look at the vase or do I want to look at the faces? Now you're selecting an option out of the sea of possibilities. You see that? Okay, so in a way what we're doing is, this is a really simple example of doing this, right? But right brain is going to be more gestalt, right? You're looking at the whole thing all at once. You're taking it all in, and you're not looking at the details. Left brain is going to be more selective and detail-oriented, right? So the left brain tends to be the side that puts things into forms. The right brain tends to be the side that is a little more holistic, more wave view. But right brain can also be wave view, right? So to ultimately get into the quantum principles, we got to go into deeper brain, right? Not the cortex, but into the deeper brain. But I just wanted you to get that experience of don't make, if you want to start tapping into the sea of possibilities and viewing things from quantum perspective, all things are true. Right? It's not this is true or that is true or this is the right way or that is the wrong way or this is the form, that's the form. It's all of it. All things are true. Open up your possibilities. Right? And then choose. From there, once you recognize the possibilities, you see them all there at once without necessarily knowing exactly which one's which, Then you choose, okay, now what do I want? What's going to serve best here, right? And then you start to create from that perspective. So the next step now, after ignition, is what I call the outburst. Okay, so as soon as you select your possibilities, then you have this slew of energy start flowing towards that possibility to support it. And you start, this is kind of like, in the creative process, now is when we go into brainstorming. All this other stuff we've done has been not using our mind, it's been using higher consciousness. Now we're going to start engaging the mind, and we're going to go into our brainstorm process. So you think of all the possibilities. Look at that object that you just selected, or that option. You start looking at it from all the angles. We work here with the element of air, so you start to maybe increase, focus on breath again, and just think. I tend to imagine all this energy coming in as these little particles of air, and they're kind of bouncing off of the walls of a container around me. And each one of those is another option or another thought surrounding that central focus. But it's sort of like a flurry of activity, and you don't censor. No censoring here, okay? You just explore all possibilities, brainstorm and mind map it, whatever, and then you're going to start kind of then recohering it, right? So you expand out, and then you eliminate some options that feel like, maybe that's not quite going to work. So then we start to narrow down, and after the expansion and then the contraction, you're going to bring it into a new vision, right? So there's a new vision that starts to emerge, and that's what I call the next step, is the nexus point, right? So we're bringing all the possibilities around that one thing to a nexus, and we're forming a clear new vision of how this is going to look. How am I going to feel? What's the impact going to be, right? So we start really bringing more definition to it now. So now we're starting to engage more of the lower mind, and our organizing abilities. We start planning it out, putting a blueprint to things, but it's ultimately that clear nexus point. This is working in the alchemical formula with the element of water, right? So the water is about creative flow, but it's also about now giving it a container, right? And the container is going to be that blueprint or that plan of how you want things to look and how you want it to ultimately be, like, what are the steps you need to take to carry it forward, right, to make it happen, and fix those possibilities into a complete vision. This is where now most people tend to create from, right? But here we don't even get into these aspects of the mind and how our mind works until we've already brought in all this energy and these possibilities from beyond the mind, from higher states of consciousness. And then we come to, and I'm kind of moving through this because I want to give you guys the experience. We come into the success step, right, which is the final step of bringing things into action. So to carry it forward, right, it's not, this is going beyond the law of intention and the law of attraction type stuff. It's not about think about it and it's going to magically manifest. Ultimately, you have some responsibility for taking action and carrying it out. How do things manifest? Usually by us taking the action to make it happen. And so this is, again, about you are empowered. You are the one to make that creation come into being. So you're going to ground the energies out. You're going to use the idea of the visualization, imagining yourself fully in the experience of this thing being manifested, fully celebrating the victory of that creation, and seeing, engaging yourself to feel how it feels to have that victory, right? To have that problem solved, or to have created that thing, and so forth. So you're going to really immerse yourself in envisioning, your new world as a result of this creative process. And then you're going to set that into motion. You're going to take action, and you're going to make it happen. You're going to fulfill your plan. You're going to follow those steps. So this is the 7 steps. So to summarize it, I call it visions, right? So we have vision, illumination, stillness, ignition, outburst, nexus, and success. And so the vision 7-step process is that breakthrough creative formula. And now I know that some of this seems a little like out of the ordinary, but just remember that the magic happens outside your comfort zone. So even though this is a new way of doing things, and it's kind of outside of our realm of familiarity, that's where you're going to really start tapping into something very powerful. And as I've been working with this formula now in various renditions of it for at least 10 years, and it's powerful. It's very powerful. And my goal was to try and take this formula that I learned from ancient traditions that usually we don't even teach people unless they're doing deeper training with us in the Kabbalistic and alchemical studies that we offer. I wanted to take it outside of that and make it available to people, who don't necessarily have that background. So I brought it together with the alchemical principles, which I think are pretty simple for people to understand, and put it in that formula that is an ancient formula. And from that, I want to help you guys master your creative process. So that's what this Creative Alchemy CD is about. I have some of them here. I don't have a whole lot of them here because I had to order more. But we have what's here, and then if I run out and you guys want it, you can also get it off the website, quantumleapalchemy.com. And so I'm gonna guide you through this. There was some other stuff I had in this presentation, just talking more about how entrainment, brainwave entrainment works, and how sounds can be used, and so forth. And that element of what we call vibrational alchemy, and that it does work with the brain, and it does work with, and just real quickly, here's a concept of entrainment. This is a very physical concept. You have chronobiology, biomusicology, and brainwave entrainment as some examples of how our body synchronizes with different rhythms. Whether you're talking the rhythm of the day-night cycle, like our circadian rhythms, we're talking about lunar cycles, right? We have a lot of women who are very familiar with how their bodies entrain to the moon cycle. And music, right, which is what a lot of shamanic techniques are based on, and vibrational sound healing is based on, is how music and rhythm can be used to entrain, like the heartbeat, for example, as well as some of the brain into that frequency, and bring us into these coherent states and these altered states. And then you have the brain, the binaural beat, that's just an image showing the two different frequencies coming in the different ears, and then it entrains. The image on the right is the synchronization of the brainwave oscillation patterns that happen as a result of that binaural beat process. And then there's some other techniques in music where, when you put music with brainwave entrainment frequencies, it's an enhanced effect. And there's certain types of frequencies, I'm not going to go into this too much, but there's certain types of frequencies called the solfeggio frequencies that have become very popular in the healing music arena. And these are frequencies that are often, they go back to some Gregorian chants, and they believe like Hildegard von Bingen was using some of these frequencies. These are more natural frequencies that we find that have emotional responses on people. So you do find a lot of church hymns in the old kind of Gregorian chants were attuned to these particular musical frequencies. And there's different ones. The Creative Alchemy CD incorporates these at different stages, right? So there's 7 different solfeggio frequencies that we use that help to also engage that emotional body, because your emotional body and your response emotionally to the creative process is really important. You have to engage your passion, engage your emotions in the process, otherwise it's not going to feel quite as energized. Personally, I recommend the Meta Music CDs by the Monroe Institute. Yep, they're really fabulous. They were the pioneers in working with binaural beat and brainwave entrainment for various audio tapes, and then they put music to them as well. So there's a lot of really good ones I can recommend. The 2 CDs that I have brainwave entrainment as well as music, and they're also guided images. The other things that are really important when it comes to accessing higher states of consciousness, and not just the brain, but is the endocrine system. And the endocrine system, we start off with the pineal gland, which is that master cell that really interacts with the brain and puts out hormone signals and so forth for relaxation and for, various oxytocin, altered states, and feeling good and so forth. So the endocrine system is really interrelated to this as well. The endocrine system is also related to the chakras, if you study any Eastern tradition. And there's another CD that I made called Quantum Insight, which is the other one I have here. I have more of those available today. Quantum Insight was one of the first ones that I made that, again, has the brainwave entrainment, but it takes you into just a deep theta and helps you sustain that. And then, has a really nice music that gets you into, basically it's getting into that state of the illuminated consciousness, accessing the quantum field, but then just really enjoying it and just staying there, as opposed to what the Creative Alchemy CD does, which is now, okay, take that and drive it through the creative process and be more active. This one is just go in there and do whatever you want to do with it, or just enjoy it. It's a really, really nice one. Whereas Creative Alchemy goes through a range of frequencies, and it becomes much more active by the end. But the Quantum Insight is an internal alchemy process where you do stimulate the pineal gland as well as do the brainwave entrainment into a deep theta state. So it's very restorative, very renewing, and more related to the crown chakra. Third eye is the pituitary. Mm-hmm. So the pineal is in the very, very center of the brain. Which is what, so if you look at this, there you see that triangle there, kind of that triangle shape. This is a top-down view of the brain in the center. And if you look at the very, very, very center, there's a little circle there. That's the pineal gland. And then if you look ahead towards the top of that sort of triangular shape, that's the pituitary gland. So that's more right behind the brow and the temples, kind of aligned with the third eye and the temples. Whereas the pineal gland's more aligned with the central core. And then the triangular stuff is called the hypothalamus, which is, so that triune system of the endocrine glands is actually really important when it comes to higher states of consciousness and intuition and so forth. Yes? Yeah, it would be an amazing process to do it every day. It's a little bit long. It's about a 50-minute meditation. I would do it at least once a week. And then if you wanted to do it every day, you certainly could. I mean, what I will tell you is from my experience of working with it is that I may think, okay, I have a really busy day and I just got to get to work, right? And I'll get to work and I'll get things done. And by the end of the day, I feel like, I really didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And then there's other days where I say, okay, I really have a lot to do and I want to get to work, but I'm going to meditate using this CD first, and I'm going to focus on specifically what it is I need to accomplish. And I take it through the whole process. I spend that hour, and I have the most productive day, when I do that first. So I get way more accomplished in one day when I work with that meditation, the Creative Alchemy one first, than I do if I did not meditate with it. Yep. Every little step, you can do it. You can do this for every little step on your big list. So what I would do first is the big goal, take it through this process, see if there's anything in your plan and your to-do list that might be missing. Maybe you think from the way you created it, maybe you think these are the most important steps to take, but you're going to do this meditation, you might get, oh, actually, there's other things that are far more important before I do that, right? So you might have a refinement of your plan happen. And then when it comes to the little things, you can, another way of using this meditation is to say, okay, I'm not necessarily trying to problem solve or figure out any new elements for my plans. Now what I want is motivation and confidence and energy to accomplish this, right? So that's what you then take in as the focus of the meditation. And then you will have a flow of energy coming through. By the time you're done with that 50 minutes of meditation, you just then set it forth through whatever it is you need to accomplish for the day. So yeah, or you can also use the quantum insight one in a similar way. You're going to access that creative potential energy, and you're going to just really get into that nice state. And then when there's a point in this one, it takes you into a deep theta state, which is a very deep meditative state. And then at the peak of the meditation, there's a gamma trigger, which is what kind of helps open up this doorway to a higher creative state of consciousness, where you then start to actively flow that through your day. So both of them are really great. The creative alchemy one is far more about the creative process and problem solving. The quantum insight one is more of a general meditation. But still, both of them are working with quantum principles. Yeah? Yeah, so that's one of the solfeggio frequency ones where I don't know a whole lot about the research. I just have heard that there was some studies that were done in a laboratory where they put DNA that was kind of damaged under the influence of that 528 hertz. And they found that under that frequency, the DNA started to repair itself. So that is one of the frequencies that does get used at a particular stage in the Creative Alchemy CD. Yeah? Yep. Uh-huh.
And that was almost 3 years ago, and we've been both using the HemiSync every single day since. Myself, I sleep with the headphones on and I listen to it all night. So am I overdoing it?
Depends on which ones you're doing, maybe?
I'm doing creativity, and I'm doing memory, and I'm doing all the mind food ones.
So they're more the H plus HemiSync mind food
Like
ones,
that.
not so much the music ones,
No.
meta music. Okay.
No.
I don't think you're overdoing it because most of those are just going into like a Focus 10 and Focus 12. That's not overdoing it. Like if you're doing the Gateway series CDs every night, that might be overdoing it.
Yeah.
And I used to listen to a lot of the HemiSync ones all night, or I get to a point where it's like I was tired of the headphones being on my head, and I just take it off.
I use earbuds now, so I can turn over.
Yeah, the music is really nice too. Meta music that has the frequencies below it, and then you just put the music on. Like my parents do this all the time. My mom has been one of their professional division members, and for 20-something years, and she helped them to create the ones that are for study, for focus, that have meta music, the music with beta frequencies behind it. But she just puts the CDs on the boombox, doesn't even worry about the headphones because the music will automatically entrain the brain, and then the frequencies also are registered. And that way you can both listen to the music all night long, and it's not words that are engaging your mind, it's just the frequencies. So that's what I tend to do, is more.
We work with that too. On our computers.
Yeah.
So cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Over here? Mike's going to come over.
I have a question about what all these different frequencies do.
Okay.
I mean, if they do anything particular to the body, affecting the body in a certain way.
Great. Okay. So the concepts here behind these solfeggio frequencies is that the 396 one at the bottom, which is sort of like, if you're going to go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, ut is the do, and that is about liberating guilt and fear, right? So this is more of an emotional thing. It helps us break out of guilt or fear or negative emotions, and it's associated with releasing old emotional patterns, right? So it's just sort of a release of those old emotional patterns. The next one up, 417, is about undoing situations and facilitating change. So this is what helps with some of the breakthrough part, breaking up old associative concepts and forms. So that one we have aligned with our breakthrough point in the meditation. And then the 528 is about repairing the DNA and actually helping integrate these new energies and new concepts into the DNA. It helps with the DNA's just self-repair, because the DNA will repair itself when it has that opportunity to do so. And turning on more, I would say, more the epigenetic layers within the DNA that help more positive DNA expression. And then you have the 639, which is about relationships. It's more whole brain, right? Whole brain kind of energy, and about connection and relationships and feeling that interconnection or feeling a unity type state. And then you have the 714 hertz, which is about awakening intuition. So this is where we start getting a little bit more into a little more spiritual, right? Associated with intuitive states and nonlinear knowing. And then the 852 is where you really start getting into what is called a return to spiritual order. It's more of a love frequency, like tapping into an unconditional love type state. And numerologically, so these Nikola Tesla, I think, said that if that there's a numerological significance to each of these numbers. They either reduce to a 3, a 6, or a 9 when you add the numbers together. And so any solfeggio frequency has to be some variation of 369 or 147 or 258, all of which are numbers that reduce to a 3, a 6, or a 9. And Nikola Tesla was also very interested in the significance of the 3, the 6, and the 9. He felt like they were one of the keys to the universe. So, yeah. So this is going to be more ancient sort of approach to vibrational healing and alchemy and music. All right. So, final question? No? Yep.
Well, I just was wondering, because of the Kundalini, the DNA pattern, all of it just becomes very synchronistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so much correlation between all of those, the whole pattern being repeated over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what happens when you have a universal pattern that's just true, right? We see this not just in the Eastern traditions, you also see this in the Hermetic and alchemical traditions, very much so. So there's certainly a strong interplay between, for example, in Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, and the chakra system. You see a strong correspondence there. Mm-hmm. So
Another question over here.
Yeah.
Yes, I have another question. When you were talking about the 7 steps of the creative alchemy,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I started practicing meditation about 2 years ago, and I found myself that I'm becoming very easy to reach the stillness stage, but a lot of times I get stuck between stillness and ignition
Right.
stage.
Yeah.
Because when I delve into that very deep quietness of the mind, I feel a lot of times I lose control
Right. Yeah.
of or any desire of thinking, or so I don't know how to push and like a solution of a problem forward,
Right.
or to become creative when
Yeah.
I reach that stage.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I find that too when I'm meditating on my own, and I just kind of get deeper. Often you get into that deep state of the stillness and the silence, and you just gone. You just check out, or you might fall asleep. And so what I find personally is that when I listen to the guided process, when somebody's guiding me or the audio's guiding me, it helps me trigger out of it, right? So it guides me in what the next step is, and it brings me back from that zoned out state. So when it comes to the creative process, that's why I think a guided imagery is really great, because otherwise on your own it's really easy. Like even we have the same kind of formula, but in a more Kabbalistic approach. And I haven't put it on CD, and yet I instruct my students to do that. And they get into that place where they're like, really in a nice zone in the high frequency energies, and then they they're gone, and they don't get through the rest of the process. So that's why I think having the CD is really nice to just kind of guide you through it. Or having, sometimes we'll do a class and people will come and then they'll be guided through it in a live way. One of the things that's so nice about the Creative Alchemy CD is that the timing of the music, and we use actual sounds from the 4 elements, and then the solfeggio frequencies. Everything is mastered and timed perfectly to support the guided imagery process. That was the work of the musician that I worked with, John Epperson, and he did a fabulous job. So it's a very enhanced experience. I find, even though I know the meditation, I could do it on my own, I find doing it with the CD is a really enhanced experience. So that's my main recommendation. Or you could, if you wanted to do something that wasn't relying on the CD, you could kind of set a timer. Set like one of those Zen bells or something, and at a certain point it goes off and it kind of wakes you up a little bit. And then from there, you're connected to the energy and you just start bringing yourself back and going through a process. So do we have time for me to lead the group?
Yeah,
After a break, maybe?
I think what we should, well, first I have a question.
Yes.
You've mentioned Kabbalah. You teach a sort of a secular version of it, is
Yes,
that right?
yeah, universal Kabbalah is what we call it. So it's more than just studying about it, and it's what we're doing is we're living it, we're experiencing it through energetic attunements. And so you study it, you learn about it from a universal context, a non-dogmatic context, but we also do something we call like raising our vibration or an ascension up the tree of life that helps us live it and experience it and transform. It's a spiritual alchemy process of transforming our it's the best thing that I know for clearing up the subconscious mind and breaking through old lifestyle type patterns and stuff. So it's very powerful and very, very beautiful process. It's a year-long process, yeah.